they can't put him at the forefront of Marvel because he's not someone to look up to. He's not a good person. Welcome to the Weekly Fix podcast, where we're just two friends talking about our passions within movies, TV shows, gaming, and comics. Thanks for checking out the podcast. We hope you like it. Hello, welcome to a one-of-a-kind special episode so far. This week, we had so much news drop with San Diego Comic-Con and then Deadpool Wolverine that we thought it appropriate to release 2 episodes this week. So you're tuning in to the first of 2. This one will be our full Deadpool Wolverine review. This will be a non-spoiler to start, and then we will dip into very heavy spoilers, so be careful with the timestamps. We'll make sure to let you know ahead of time, but just make sure that you are checking those timestamps, and if you don't want anything spoiled for you, go ahead and click off when we say we are entering spoiler territory. We want to make sure that you have a chance to experience the movie it was supposed to be watched, and make sure that you get the full experience of Deadpool Wolverine if you are planning to watch that. We are joined again with my amazing co-host Jacob. He has completed his move to Jacksonville. He is actually live in person today in studio. It's great to have him here. Jacob, how are you doing?
Man, dude, I'm excited to be back, and a big thank you to Zane and Peyton for doing an amazing episode talking about The Acolyte last week. I really enjoyed listening to it on my way down. The drive was, a drive, never fun, but we are finally in Jacksonville, and like Zane just mentioned, we are in person, so hopefully this is something we can do a little bit more in the future. I think it gives a much better dynamic getting to see each other's reactions a little bit, so it's really fun, and I'm super excited to talk about it. But yeah, like Zane just touched on, so much fun Marvel news, but we are going to do our first ever, probably 2-episode week. We'll decide maybe when we're going to drop these episodes to break down all the SDCC news, but today's episode is going to be 100% dedicated to Deadpool and Wolverine, which was not only this is the first time we're doing an in-person podcast, but we actually got to go to the movies for the first time together, which was super fun.
Which was amazing.
Yeah, we got to do a lot of elbow shrugging whenever we saw some stuff come up on screen. So it's going to be super fun to talk about it, and I can't wait.
Yeah, and I think we should just kind of go ahead and jump right into it because we do have a ton of things to talk about. I want to get kind of just an overview of your enjoyment, some of the things that you didn't necessarily enjoy without spoilers, of course. Just currently the vibes that you went into it with and came out of it with. What were you thinking?
Yeah, so the vibes for me going in were like super high. I think we talked about it a whole lot on our drive to the movie theater. I was so excited just to finally be back in a movie theater. It's been a little while since I've seen a movie in the theaters, so just that overall experience is super fun. But yeah, I think it was overall a really good experience. I'm not going to necessarily dive too much into our thoughts on things. We're going to wait till we get more into the spoiler review territory to really give my thoughts and to tell you what I liked and didn't like. But overall, I think I had a really good time with the movie. If it's a movie that you are actually on the fence about, which I think most people listening to this podcast, you're probably not on the fence about this one. You're probably excited to go see it. But no, this is one I would definitely recommend you go check out. I think it did a lot of things really well. Some of the best action scenes I think we've seen in Marvel in a while. Talking about some of the movies we've gotten in the past, first movie that comes to my mind was The Marvels. I felt like the action scenes were a little lacking in that movie.
Oh, wow.
Personally, it wasn't like Guardians 3. I feel like Guardians 3 did have really good action. It did. So Deadpool and Wolverine was really good. I felt like it got back to those really fun action scenes. The story was good. That's something we're going to talk about a little bit more. I don't know that it really necessarily pushed me to say, like, this is a must-see movie for the MCU. Not any spoilers, but this is a movie I think you could potentially skip if you really didn't need to go see it right now.
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of good things there. You definitely don't have to see it currently. Now, that could definitely change in the future, and I think we'll get into maybe why that is a positive or a negative in a little bit. Mm-hmm. But so Jacob, you do recommend going and watching this?
Yeah, absolutely. As an MCU fan, I think this is a must-see. And it's funny I say it's a must-see when I say you could skip it. But I think if you're more so on the fence about it, you're not going to really miss, as of right now, like Zane just touched on, I don't think any movies coming out in the future you're going to need to have seen this for. Obviously we're going to talk about San Diego Comic-Con and some news that we saw recently that maybe might sway some things a little bit. But like as of right now, we've seen all the SDCC news. We know what's coming. And this movie definitely does not be like go see it right now or you're not going to know what's happening with Marvel. That is definitely not the case, in my opinion, right now with this movie.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I do just want to give the disclaimer real quick. We are a clean podcast, and one of the reasons that is the case is because we have Christian worldviews. Me and Jacob are both born again believers. We believe in Christ and that He died for our sins, and that is one thing that this movie takes a pretty hard joke at, I would say, and I don't love that. It made it a little bit harder for me to watch those scenes because those jokes do come up. He does, I mean, in the trailers, it's not a spoiler if you saw a trailer, he does call himself Marvel Jesus, and that is not a one-off. He does that several times, and that is something that just irks me, as that is my overarching reason for being alive, is Christianity and what Christ did for me. So I don't like that at all, and that does hurt. So if you are very sensitive to those jokes, they don't go over the top with it. I will say it is watchable. It doesn't make me completely dislike the movie, but it definitely does hurt my rating for it because it is in there. In the last, I would say 10 minutes, they make a joke to me that put it like from okay, it's just a saying to okay, that's a little bit too much. But I will say, like, if you are very sensitive to those topics and you can't handle it, I would definitely steer clear of this one because they do that. And then the language is clearly rough. We talked about that. Ryan Reynolds is very smooth with it. If somebody's going to curse, he's. It's not like it's like a I guess over the top cursing from a person who doesn't seem like he should be. I know that's sometimes weird to say, but you can definitely tell when it's super forced. And Ryan Reynolds is just how he talks. This is the world we live in, and cursing really to me doesn't really take away from a movie for me anymore unless it's forced or if there's GDs. And there was quite a few GDs, which really kind of it's like getting like, I don't know, pinched, like getting like stabbed with a needle or something, and it's just like
that nerve.
Like I just wish you wouldn't have said that. And so there is that in the movie, and I did want to get that out of the way first and foremost because that does affect my enjoyment of a movie, and I know there's a lot of people that probably listen to this podcast that may want to go watch it, but those things will probably hinder them from their enjoyment of it or even just make them not want to watch it, and I completely understand that. But everything going forward from here will take that into consideration, and my overall rating is affected by those two things. So I thought it was important to say kind of upfront just to let you know that those things are present and they are there.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And there's a lot of things he did a good job, Zane, touching on. It didn't really feel forced, but I'm going to be honest, even having seen the other two Deadpool movies, and maybe it's just because it's been a minute, it did feel over the top in a lot of scenes, just for sake of using the words. And I know they did use it in the previous ones, and you might know a little bit better just thinking back. Your memory might remember it. I don't remember it being quite as bad in the previous Deadpool movies.
I'm pretty sure they were almost identical.
Okay.
I think the reason this one felt worse is because everyone was using it.
Maybe that's what it was.
In the previous Deadpools, it seems like we have Colossus to like kind of like, hey, like keep Wade in line. We have somebody else who's there like, stop doing that. But in this one, we really don't get that. We get, Hugh Jackman's throwing him out there. Everyone is just cursing up a storm. So I don't want to say anything else without like I've almost slipped up and said a spoiler like 5 times already.
Yeah.
But
no, I agree. And maybe that's what it was. It's really getting me to think about it a little bit more in that light. Is the Colossus thing was a good point. There are some of those other characters in the Deadpool movies that kind of try to keep him in line, but it almost feels like Wolverine is doing the opposite in this movie. He is almost like pushing Deadpool to get to that point. He is egging it on just as much as Deadpool is forcing him to get into those same, similar conversations and stuff like that. But no, overall, I think I really did enjoy the movie. Those things aside, and those things, if you are sensitive to that type of stuff, this is probably one you will want to steer clear of. But talking about some of the good things, we talked a little bit about the bad things, and I mentioned the action scenes a little bit. I think that is probably the strongest aspect of this movie, was how good the action scenes were.
Yeah, and the action scenes were incredible.
Yeah.
Now, we both have discussed our concerns about the use of gore and even language, because gore can somewhat be the same. I did not feel like they went crazy on the gore here. I think if you are sensitive to gore in a sense like you can't watch like a doctor operation, then you're going to have a very difficult situation, but if you've seen clips from The Boys and some of the over the top gore that's in that, this is not that. They do have significant gore. The action scenes are violent, but I don't think it was to the point where it was like, oh my goodness, that was so excessive. Like, I'm sick to my stomach because of the gore, which I thought was like, I was refreshed with the action sequence. I still think that it wasn't the best editing they could have done. We touched on, if you've seen Kingsman Secret Service, I think they do a better job with touching realistic gore with fights and how, like, things should react. Like, if you get hit upside the head with a blunt force object, like, you don't just like throw blood toward the screen and blood and like red patches. Like, it would be more subtle, it'd be a mist or something like that. And I think this movie does put it forward like a little excessive, but it's not over the top gore. And I don't think anyone who is relatively okay with watching semi-gory R-rated movies would have an issue with this one.
No, and if you watch the trailer for this movie, it does very keep in line with what you saw as far as gore is concerned in the trailers. You know, we do see, like, in the trailer there, so this isn't a spoiler, you guys don't have to worry about spoilers yet. You do see the scene where Deadpool is shooting Wolverine in the side with pistols and blood is just shooting out of Wolverine. That's that unrealistic gore we're talking about, but it does very much keep in line with that. So if you're good with that in the trailers and stuff, I don't think gore will be an issue. But the action scenes were really good. You know, touching on the acting, I think the acting itself was actually really good as well. The actors did a fantastic job of really bringing the characters back to life. It's been a little while since we've seen Wolverine and Hugh Jackman like that, so that was really good. Ryan Reynolds is always fantastic as Deadpool. So what did you think overall of the acting part of it?
I thought it was very good acting. I was not disappointed in anyone's performance. There was one character that I did not like what they did with them, but it wasn't bad acting. It was a directorial choice of how to go with the character, and I didn't love that, but we'll touch on that in spoilers because we cannot say his name without probably spoiling something that somebody doesn't want to know. But yeah, like you said, you can definitely tell that both of the lead characters, Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds, both were like, this was their passion project. Like, they were happy to be there. They both wanted to be there, and they're giving it everything they got because this may or may not be their last run at Deadpool and Wolverine.
Yeah, no, and touching on that, you know, I definitely don't think these characters are gone. They're going to play a point in the MCU moving forward, but there's been some talks and some signs that maybe Hugh Jackman, this was really his last time suiting up as Wolverine. Maybe this is the last time we see, I definitely don't think it's the last time we see Deadpool as Ryan Reynolds, but it definitely could happen. But overall, the acting was really good. Touching on some spoiler-free parts of the story, this is where the movie, personally, for me, was lacking. I don't feel like the story was really there, more so than just to have fun, if that makes sense. I don't feel like it pushed the MCU forward, and some people might not necessarily even think that's a knock on a movie. Some people do like those self-contained stories where a movie tells a story and it's good. You know, you don't need to have watched other things and you don't need to watch stuff moving forward, and that's definitely how I feel like this movie was. I feel like it was a very self-contained story, but just where we're at with the MCU, I feel like this movie did need to push forward the overall story of the MCU and what we're going to be getting in the future, rather than kind of settling on a self-contained story right now.
Yeah, and even above that, I think that this was even too self-contained in and of itself.
Yeah.
Like, not even just with the MCU. I felt like the story they didn't go for a good story as much as they did, hey, let's let Wolverine and Deadpool go at some things. I really wish they would have thought through. It didn't seem like this story had near as much stakes in and of itself.
No, not at all.
But that has to be thought through. And I think when you're trying to inject something into the MCU that you really can't go forward with, and because some of those things we talked about, there's a scene in it where it kind of sets up beforehand like why we love heroes. And I thought that was a really good point, that Deadpool is not a hero and why he's not a hero. And that's kind of like, they can't put him at the forefront of Marvel because he's not someone to look up to. He's not a good person. And so even moving forward, even though this movie is being incredibly successful, that's not what you want from a superhero film, is a degenerate at the front of it who just doesn't care about anything but himself. And I think that's kind of the trouble with injecting him into the MCU overall, is that you can't put Deadpool in a Spider-Man movie really and appeal to the broad stream, because Deadpool is only Deadpool if this vulgarity and nonsense is there, and maybe they make a joke about it and censor it, but he kind of runs any story he's in because he's so over the top. He's got the fourth wall breaks and then everything else. So I think they were a little worried about putting him into the MCU and giving him a big part when they know, I would say, a good portion of their core fan base really doesn't want that style of hero and language in the MCU, me being one of them.
Yeah, no, I agree with that because he does really take away so much. And I think that does speak volumes to the character as well, though. When he's on the screen, he is commanding of his space, which I think is a good thing for characters. They need to be able to command the space they're given. Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds do a fantastic job of commanding their space and taking what they want in the scenes that they're in. So that goes back to the acting. They did a really great job of that. But that's a great point to bring up is if Deadpool's on the screen, he is going to be almost at the forefront of whatever scene he's a part of. He's not going to take a back seat just because of who he is. So I like that analogy as well. So that's kind of my take on the story. I feel like it was too self-contained, like Zane said, and I also feel like we talked about it. It's about a 2-hour long movie, and it didn't feel long enough. It did feel like they rushed stuff towards the end, especially. Like, I felt like we were starting to pick up some traction. I felt like the story was starting to go somewhere, and then before I knew it, it was over. So I feel like that was some stuff they maybe could have worked on a little bit better with some pacing and stuff like that. But overall, the story is okay. It's not like a must-go-see just because of the story. This is a more must-go-see if you love Marvel, you love good action scenes, and I would say pretty heavily if you like nostalgia, because you're going to get a lot of nostalgia, which we'll get into a little bit more with the spoiler stuff. But did you have anything else to say before we get into those spoilers that you wanted to talk about?
I think, honestly, I think we kind of covered as much as we can without going into spoilers, because spoilers is so, like, it's so everywhere. So I have a ton more to say, and I hope you do go watch it and come back and listen to it if you don't, or if you don't care about spoilers. I know some people don't care about spoilers and they enjoy it just as much. Spoiler for No Way Home. I knew Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire were going to show up for 7 to 8 months before that movie, and I enjoyed it just as much when they showed up on the screen. I don't know if I would have enjoyed it more if I didn't know they were there. But sometimes that can play an effect for anything. But anyway, that's our non-spoiler review. We'll drop a timestamp for our ratings. If you want to hop to the end and get our ratings, just be careful with that. Make sure that you if you don't want to have any spoilers, I can't promise that in our ratings it may not give away some spoilers, because the story is a big portion of my rating, and I do want to cover kind of why that dropped my rating for me. But good movie. I will say it was on the upper end of ratings for me, as far as it's above a 5. So if you know my rating system, that's not much to run off of, but it is above a 5. And I would recommend go watching it if you're okay with the language and the jokes that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, for sure. Hopping right into those spoilers, I think the movie does start off very strong. I think it's very fun, and I think that's something we're going to touch on a little bit. You touched on it a little bit with the hero aspect. The movie has a really good start, and I was really excited and enjoying the movie when it got going. But it does, like I said, it does start to tail off a little bit to kind of just letting Deadpool and Wolverine do a lot of fan servicey stuff. Throughout this movie, we get, I think, just off the top of my head, we get 2 pretty long fights between just Deadpool and Wolverine alone, where I feel like that was more fan service oriented stuff. I don't necessarily know that we needed 2 of them. I feel like we could have just got the one and maybe use that other scene for some more story building, give us some more things. And they do come at good points. I don't think they did a bad spot of when to do them, but we did get 2 just head-on fights, which I was like, yeah, it's fun. It's super cool looking, but they weren't necessarily needed.
And they shortened the one. They did. Yes. You can definitely clearly see, there's a big portion of that fight we didn't see.
Yeah.
Which I think is even crazier, considering, I agree. I think we got, those fights were great, but I'm not sure we needed the extent of it. If they were going to go with this runtime and this story, they should have put those resources maybe somewhere else, maybe a little better fight, maybe something else a little bit more crucial to the story, even though, especially the second fight, I believe, had more story implications for me.
Yeah.
And I really love the cause of that fight. That was a really like actually emotional point with Wolverine insulting Deadpool's love, which is why he's on this entire journey. But let's just go ahead and hop into spoilers real quick. What did you what like let's break down the story.
Yeah.
Like what's the story?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The story was fun when it got started. Like I said, Deadpool is kind of finding out that his world is going to be coming to an end, which is due to the TVA kind of going rogue. And that's one of the things we touched on that we weren't necessarily really happy about. We're not that far out from Loki season 2. At that point, the TVA should be, pretty good overall. All the bad roots should have been rooted out. We should be having a good overall timeline of these TVA agents really just trying to keep it clean. But lo and behold, we already have a rogue one that's starting to cause problems, and he's kind of wanting to become almost the god of stories, kind of like what Loki is in a sense. He's kind of wanting to control the timeline and dictate what's happening there. So that's kind of the start of the movie.
Yeah, I think it's actually funny because like I don't even necessarily think he wanted that much power. Essentially, I think he was more being like lazy because in the story we see that because the main character of a timeline had died, that timeline was dying. And his job, the TVA agent, was to monitor that into its death. And he was just supposed to allow that to decay properly. And he creates a device to rip it. I think it's called a time ripper to just completely obliterate that, kind of prune it like you saw in Loki, and do that quickly. It didn't seem like it really made much sense. Like, I didn't see his motives other than, hey, I just don't want to do this anymore. Did you? So you feel like he wanted to be a god of stories. I felt like he was just going to be lazy. Did I miss something on that?
I feel like I remember him saying that he was kind of sick of being told what to do. He kind of wanted to be in charge, and he didn't like the direction and the people that were above him. I don't remember if I heard that line correctly, but I feel like that was originally one of the first things he said.
I actually do remember that, and I remember thinking it felt like Satan challenging Jesus actually in heaven when he was cast down because he said he was tired of being the one that was glorifying and wanted to be glorified, and I felt like that was almost a reference to that. Did you catch that, or did you feel?
I didn't necessarily catch it in that light, but we already touched on all the Marvel Jesus stuff. That could have been a storyline they were kind of trying to show us as well, because they were wanting to go with those jokes and stuff like that. So that's actually a good analogy. They might have been trying to implement it that way. I didn't catch it on my first view. That might be something when I watched the movie again, I'm like, oh, that is really, really evident. But no, I didn't pick up on that necessarily at first, but I did pick up on he kind of wanted to be the one, getting the glory for keeping the timeline alive rather than the sacrifice Loki had made.
Yeah, Loki is not mentioned.
No.
We do see Hunter B-15 at the end of the movie, but the TVA does not seem like something that, like, I thought it would be after Loki. The first aspect that they're going and pruning anything kind of like shocked me because he's supposed to be allowing all stories to live.
Yep.
And then we got another thing, which was the mention of the sacred timeline, which I was upset with because Loki did away with sacred timelines. There is no sacred timeline. So I felt like that was really bad coherency of a storytelling to even mention sacred timelines because there isn't one. Loki made that very evident that there is no sacred timeline anymore. All stories are important. And I feel like they did that just to distinguish for the common fan that the 616 timeline is the sacred, that is the MCU that we're familiar with. But no longer is that a sacred timeline. Even Kevin Feige has said, hey, all stories are Marvel stories now. It's not just the previously known Infinity Saga that's MCU. It's everything. It's Fox. It's the Guardians of the Galaxy. It's everything, which Guardians of the Galaxy is MCU. But he really has made that clear that he wants everything to be considered part of the multiverse. And I feel like saying the sacred timeline was a mistake. That was just on me.
No, I agree with that because it does feel like it takes away from what we got in Loki season 2, which, that kind of leads back into, though, one thing I think they touched on, which I thought was really cool, is the introduction of the anchor beings.
Yes.
I really like that aspect. And if you guys haven't seen the movie or you're still watching it, the anchor beings are essentially one person in each timeline that is the anchor of that timeline. Once that character dies or that person dies, that is when that timeline will cease to exist. And that's kind of where Deadpool comes to the fact that he finds out that his anchor being has died. And it's a little joke in there that he thought he was the anchor being, which I love that aspect. And the TVA agents actually, like, it's funny that Deadpool thought he could be an anchor being. I thought that was hilarious.
I also think it's hilarious because he is like the only one bringing in money. Like he is the anchor being of Fox. Like he's the one that like is actually has successful movies.
Yeah.
But they're referencing, and even weirder for me is that the anchor being of that universe was Logan, which isn't in the Deadpool universe.
Yeah.
Which I thought was super odd that like his timeline is dying in a Logan timeline that they don't combine. So that was really odd to me that I'm pretty sure that Logan it's an entirely separate universe. It's not even after the X-Men movies.
Yeah, that might be something that they could have retconned a little bit just for the sake of making Logan the anchor being, and that was their kind of way to get Wolverine into Deadpool's movie, because that's what Deadpool is eventually he's not really tasked with this. He was kind of tasked as just being a helper to the TVA, but he then makes it upon himself. He's going to go find another Wolverine to replace the anchor being, which we find out isn't possible.
Yeah, so essentially the story of the movie is the TVA is pulling him from his universe to be put into the sacred timeline, 616 MCU timeline, and become a character. Deadpool gets upset because he would leave his friends behind, and he's not okay with because they can't go with him. And so he, instead of accepting that, he says, okay, I'm going to resurrect the anchor being, bring a Wolverine to my universe so that we'll have a anchor being once again and my universe will be saved. Which, again, is kind of what we were talking about. Like, it didn't further the MCU along because at the end of the movie, we're just going to skip around because we're talking about it. Like, he saves his universe and he never goes to the MCU. So he never even joins the MCU timeline. He never sees the MCU timeline. So I don't really get what the point was. Ryan Reynolds said in a tweet that this was like their origin story, but there was no conclusion of origin at the end of it because they're still in their timeline. They were going to I think they were going to take Hugh back to his timeline.
Yeah, that was something they didn't really touch on.
He kind of stays with Deadpool and his friends, so it seems like the Deadpool timeline is good and alive and will just be staying. So to me, I think this just says that we'll see this timeline collapse after Avengers 5 into Secret Wars. We'll see this timeline kind of get destroyed and Doctor Doom will probably put it back together into one singular timeline. But I don't think he's going to the MCU.
Yeah, I'm interested to see in which direction they go with that because like he just touched on, they don't ever... I think there's one short scene where it shows Earth 616 at the bottom of the screen.
Oh, yeah, when his introduction at the start. But that also didn't make any sense.
Yeah, it was really kind of random. And it did not push the story forward. It didn't push Deadpool forward in a fact of being in part of the MCU. It just kind of was there. He was kind of... I think was he looking for a Wolverine at that part?
No. That was when he was interviewing with Happy.
Oh, that's right.
So at the beginning, so what I touched on earlier about heroes being heroes and Deadpool being Deadpool, he's interviewing for the Avengers with Happy Hogan, and Happy Hogan essentially says, like, Deadpool says, well, he says, why do you want to be an Avenger? And Deadpool says, because I need it. I need to be better and essentially he's saying, like, Vanessa needs me to be better. I want to be better. I need it. And Happy says, that's exactly why you can't be an Avenger, because you need it. The Avengers avenge because they do it for everyone else, not for themselves. And I thought that was a really good point, and kind of like why Deadpool does suck as a hero, because he is just a selfish bag of flesh. Like, he really doesn't have anything really good in him. He may do good things, but that is just indirectly because it benefits him.
Yeah.
So, or people that he loves. And, a hero is someone who loves regardless of what they can do for them. They do it regardless of how they are going to get retreated in response. It's just they do the right thing. And so I thought that was a really good intro with Happy and kind of why he can't be an Avenger. But that was really the only time they ever really showed the 616, I believe.
Yeah, I think it is. And it could be something they end up doing in a future movie where Happy he is now familiar with Deadpool. Maybe that's
Potentially,
kind of the tie-in that they were going with. But, as a movie that was supposed to be introducing Deadpool and Wolverine into the MCU, if that's what we were supposed, that was their introduction, that was kind of lame. Like, we needed more, in my opinion, with that. It really was just a short scene, just a back and forth conversation, and then lo and behold, Deadpool was back in his own universe, or he went back to the TVA headquarters. He was bouncing back and forth there, but that was kind of a little bit lame, in my opinion, that might have been his introduction into the MCU, when I feel like they really marketed this movie kind of geared towards Deadpool and Wolverine are going to be in the MCU now. And like Zane said, at the end of the movie, they're not.
Yeah, unless they were saying that because of that interview, they were already in the 616 and just haven't been shown.
Yeah.
There is a potential that their universe is 616 and the other universe, which I believe is 10,015, is not. Like, that was a separate universe that they went to, but I don't believe that's the case. I believe their universe is 1015, and the universe he portaled to that universe, I'm assuming, to have that interview. Who knows? But anyway, regardless, the problem with Marvel right now is that if you did not listen to the news, you didn't keep up with what's going on, you would have no clue what the overarching story is. There's no connection. That is the faulty. That we're having amazing movies. We're having some amazing movies that are still very good. They're fun, but the connectivity that made Marvel so special is not there currently, and they really need to get us back on track before. And I think they're not even going to do it before Avengers 5. I think Avengers 5 may be what actually
fixes everything.
Not even fixes everything, just ties it back together. Like, this multiverse has been such a spaghetti of solo films without any follow up, that I don't really see what they're going to do to kind of bring it back, except with an Avengers movie, maybe tie everything together and kind of wipe it clean, which is, I'm assuming that's what they're doing. Well, but I kind of want to stay on Deadpool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just like we're talking about, how many times have we said with other movies recently, though, we don't feel like this pushed the MCU forward?
Every single thing we've done.
Every movie. And this is another one of those stories where we're just like, we're dying to know where the MCU is going. We're dying to see it. Not at a Comic-Con. We don't want to be told. We want to see it on the screen. Like, how is this all going to come together? And this was just another one of those movies that doesn't do it. It is a self-contained story like all the other ones have been. They have their own villains. They have their own story. And by the end of it, it seems like everything's wrapped up and all is good. And that's kind of been my problem with the MCU. And that's something that this movie, I talked about it earlier. That's my problem with the story here as well.
Yeah, and we don't even see any single. Happy Hogan is the only person from the MCU we see, and I do kind of want to talk. Well, we get one other cameo. We do get a flash of Mark Ruffalo's Hulk, which is a very fun cameo, and I really enjoyed that. I did want to see more of that though, and that wasn't even the MCU's Hulk. That was just Mark Ruffalo's Hulk in a different universe with a different Wolverine. And so we do get to see a lot of fun cameos during his search for Wolverine, which is essentially a montage. We see some of the classic covers played out on live screen, which is a blast. We get to see a bunch of really fun comic accurate Wolverines. We get to see Henry Cavill, or Cavill, however you want to say his name. We were discussing that yesterday, as Wolverine, which I thought was a blast.
For sure.
Do you think there's any potential he becomes the 616's Wolverine?
Well, see, this is one thing we have it in our notes here is, what is a cameo? You're right. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are going to say there was a lot of cameos in this movie, but ultimately, if you're really talking about cameos, there was probably about 2. Because cameos are usually when you see a certain character that's never been played by a certain actor before show up on screen. That was the Henry Cavill or the Henry Cavill. That was one of them. We got to see him as Wolverine, and I really kind of do hope that was indicative of the future, because I think he's too good of an actor to not be doing anything right now, and he's kind of just floating around out there. And he looked really good, dude, as Wolverine. It was really, really cool.
He's so massive. It's crazy.
Yeah, so that was super cool. That was one of the cameos. And then the Mark Ruffalo thing was kind of a cameo, but he's also in the MCU. So take that with you. But we got some other characters that got brought back that we'll touch on a little bit. But no, some of the cameos, like the Henry Cavill stuff, was really really cool. Which I always like certain cameos. I don't like when a movie just does them for the sake of doing them. This movie did them pretty well.
Yeah, and honestly, like you said, I think we only had two. We're going to touch on all the characters we got to see. We'll give you like a rundown of like who all made an appearance, but they made actual appearances. Like they had effects in the story. It wasn't just like, Brad Pitt getting electrocuted as Invisible Man. They had story points. They did affect the movie, and I think a cameo really doesn't affect the movie. Stanley, 6-second clips are a cameo. They don't really affect the movie. Don't push the story forward at all. And so we got to see Henry Cavill, and then we got to see Hulk. And I love that they were really going off of Wolverine's most famous comics, kind of, to touch on. We got to see Wolverine as Patch. We got to see like the Age of Apocalypse Wolverine, where he was like crawling on the ground and completely ravaging everything in the future. We got to see one of the like most famous Wolverine Hulk comic books, where we saw Hulk in the reflection of Wolverine's claws, which is one of the Incredible Hulk's comic covers, which is really fun. Then we got to see Old Man Logan blast Deadpool off a porch, which was a blast. And that was like a true Old Man Logan, not like the Logan movie we saw. And then we got to see the Uncanny X-Men cover, where it's apocalyptic future, and Deadpool is pretty much getting crucified on a massive X, which was a very visceral moment. I thought was crazy how kind of gory they went in that scene.
Yeah.
And Deadpool like walks in and like was like, okay, you're not the Wolverine I'm looking for. I'm gonna go back. And he like immediately leaves. That was like a moment. I was glad they didn't linger on that.
Yeah.
And it was cool that it was directly pulled from a comic. And I didn't realize even how much every single cameo was pulled from a comic cover until I saw it on Instagram, which was really cool because I had stayed so much off of social media because I didn't want any spoilers. But do you want to kind of run down the non-cameo? What do you think, the like special characters from the Fox universe we kind of saw?
Yeah, we saw some really cool ones. I would say the one that we saw, so the big ones that we saw for sure that had the most prevalent roles, we got to see Blade, we got to see Wesley Snipes, which was really cool. We saw Elektra as Jennifer Gardner, we saw Gambit as Channing Tatum, and we saw X-23 as Daphne Keane. Those were probably the biggest cameos, the most long-lasting ones that really had more of an effect on the story. And then we did have Chris Evans as Human Torch. I don't feel like he was as big of a point as the other four. I feel like he was definitely there, and he did provide some story points. But it was just cool seeing Chris Evans back in the MCU. Even though he wasn't as Captain America, and they make some jokes about that. And one thing we didn't touch on really in the non-spoiler part, some of the jokes really hit really well. I mean, the movie is funny. I laughed a whole lot during the movie. And some of the Chris Evans scenes might have been some of the funniest in the whole movie.
Dude, I thought it was crazy. Like, it's so weird to watch a Marvel movie of him being a douche. Like,
yes,
because like when Deadpool cusses and when Deadpool is a jerk, like you expect it, it's fine. But when Captain America is doing it on screen, you're like, oh no, not Cap. But he's Johnny Storm, who is a notorious jerk in the comics and isn't a good dude. So I thought that was like kind of a crazy comparison, and that they had him on screen so long.
Yes,
I actually before on the ride there, I actually told Jacob I expected to see Johnny Storm as Chris Evans in this movie, but I expected like a flyby, like a flame on flyby, not a full. I mean, he's probably 10-15 minutes in the movie at least, and that was crazy.
Yeah, and it was really cool to see him. One of my favorite lines might have been Deadpool is he's so excited to meet Captain America. Captain America's getting ready to make some epic thing, and Deadpool yells, he's like, oh, he's about to say it, and they both yell their same line at the same time, but Deadpool yells Avengers Assemble, and Chris Evans yells flame on, and Deadpool's like, wait, what? Like, you're not supposed to say that. So that was one of the really funny moments in the movie. But that's not the only little, other characters we got to see. We got to see Toad. We saw Sabretooth, which I'm interested to hear your take on the Sabretooth character, because he was not in it for very long at all. He was a 15-second character. We saw Psylocke, we saw Lady Deadpool, we saw Juggernaut, we saw Pyro. They brought back a lot of fun characters and stuff, which was really cool. But yeah, what did you think of the Sabretooth one? I think there was even a trailer, I think, dedicated to the Sabretooth. And
We've been waiting decades for this fight.
Yeah, and if you saw that trailer with Sabretooth, you about saw the whole scene that he's in.
Yeah, honestly, I was incredibly thankful that fight was not like actually big, because Sabretooth is significantly lesser than Wolverine. No one likes Sabretooth like they like Wolverine, except unless you're like, I don't know.
You just like
I don't want to
like
insult anybody, but like it is weird. Like it seems like you're trying to be like niche if you like Sabretooth is actually better than Wolverine. Like, okay, you're just saying that, you don't actually believe that. Because Wolverine's actually a character and Sabretooth is a side character. But anyway, like that fight is quick, it's done over with, and I loved it. Like I love that they built that up and then that fight was over so quick. I don't mind teasing something like that, because honestly, in the trailers, I was like, I don't think anyone was waiting for this rematch. Like, because they were like, they've waited decades for this fight, and I was like, well, I haven't. Like,
I didn't really care.
I want Wolverine to fight somebody else. Like,
yeah,
Sabretooth is kind of like a more psychological fight than it is physical, because of the history between the two and the brothership. Like, and that's covered at length in X-Men Origins.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I think is I really enjoyed it when I was a child. So I mean, I haven't seen it in a minute, so maybe it
didn't age too well.
I don't think it aged well, but I'm not going to put it through that test. I'll just remember it fondly in my childhood Zane perspective. But yeah, I was very glad that fight went as quickly as it did.
Yeah, and it was cool to see some of these other characters. Like I talked about, we got a very interesting line and something we have talked about extensively. If you guys are fans of Marvel, like I'm sure you are watching this, and you've heard about all the problems that Blade has had, that was actually one of the things they brought up. Jennifer Gardner as Elektra, and they brought up that there's been other characters that have played their role. But Wesley Snipes, when he's on screen, he says there's never been another Blade and there never will be. So we're kind of speculating. Maybe that was a little bit of a hint that the Blade movie might be done for. But what did you think about those other characters that we saw that really had an impact on the story? The Blade, the Elektra, the Gambit, and the X-23.
Yeah, I want to touch on Gambit first, because I'm personally a very big fan of Channing Tatum. I really like almost anything he does. He's a blast. I think he's hilarious. I think he's fun. And all of the rom-coms he's in, like The Vow, and then his stupid movies like 21 Jump Street, 2022 Jump Street. Like, I love all of those. I think that he's hilarious. I think that his comedic value and timing is very good, and that he's a fun action star. And his role in Gambit sucked. Like, but it sucked on purpose.
Yeah.
Like they comment on it so many times, like, oh, you guys didn't get your franchise, or your world's died, or you just really wanted one, but they didn't let you have it. And like looks at Gambit and like saying like, Channing Tatum wanted to be Gambit, but they never got it off the ground. And I think that was really like a great joke that landed for me.
Yeah.
But also I think they made him not one. I don't think anyone walked away wanting more Channing Tatum Gambit. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the point. I think he was there, and we see a lot of Channing Tatum Gambit. His fight is awesome. His really powers are used well, and given that it's a rated R film, we got to see those explosions actually be a little bit more powerful than they generally are in non-rated R films, because you can't really blow people up in a PG-13 film without them, like, it's like, well, is his cars really exploding, or are like they just like pushing?
Yeah,
like are they pushing people
throwing
back
them against the wall and stuff?
So I thought that was really good, but his accent is awful. It is hard to listen to. Deadpool even says, like, "Who is your dialect coach?" I feel like we're missing key points of information here with you not being able to talk. And I thought it was really good that Channing Tatum's Louisiana accent was so bad, but it was bad on purpose, and I appreciated it. But I do hope that maybe they even bring him over, because it does seem like Elektra, Blade, Gambit, and X-23 survive this film, and that they are going to be going forward as their characters. I don't think this is the last we're going to see of those four, especially. What do you think?
I hope not. And the reason we're not so sure about that is because at the end of the movie, there's a little scene where they're all at a little party together. Deadpool and Wolverine have survived everything, and they're sitting at the little birthday party as well, or just a get together party as well. And X-23 is there, which you're led to believe that she does die in the void. But, at the end of the movie, it shows that she actually survived. So that's what leads us to believe that Blade, Elektra, and Gambit also survived the void as well, and actually found a way out of it. So I also do agree. I really hope that we get them again. I think we'll see Elektra, Jennifer Gardner as Elektra in the Daredevil show. I definitely think she's there.
Really?
I do. I think she'll be in that. Whether it might be kind of just a little quick clip where we just see her for a second, I do think she'll be in that. Blade, I don't know. I think we'll see him again. I just don't know in what capacity, because the Blade movie, like I just touched on, is going through
production hell.
Yes, it is. It is struggling. And he, like I said, he made the point that he's the only one that's ever played Blade, and he's the only one that ever will play Blade. So I don't know how that's going to go. I definitely think he'll be shown up at some point. That's something I couldn't make a prediction on. And then Gambit, the Channing Tatum, I think he'll be in something, probably an X-Men film in the future that we get with the MCU. I wouldn't be surprised if they give him that casting. But that's something we did want to touch on as far as characters we did see, is we don't see any X-Men outside of Gambit.
Right.
And, some people could even argue he's not really one of the core X-Men members. I know a lot of people would, some people wouldn't, but we don't see a Cyclops, we don't see a Jean Grey, we don't see a Storm, we don't see a Professor X. There's a lot of characters that I expected to see in this movie that we just don't.
And I was actually thinking on that, and I think one of the reasons is, so this movie predominantly takes place in the void. So these are people, outcasts, people who didn't get a final legacy, whose franchises were dead, and the movies that have X-Men in them lived. Like, we got to see a very good conclusion of the X-Men. Well, we got to see lots of movies with the X-Men. Dark Phoenix, is that the last one? Dark Phoenix?
I think it might be.
Yeah, so that one was kind of a bummer, because I did not love that one. But we got to see X-Men First Class, which is beloved, and then Days of Future Past, which is a very good film. So those cinemas, those cinematic universes, those timelines, I think they're saying are healthy and aren't collapsing. Okay. But Blade is dead. Elektra's one is dead. Channing Tatum's never got off the ground. X-23 died because she was in Logan universe, who died, and so that's the reason she's there. Mm-hmm. And so I think a lot of this was showing that the X-Men don't show up because their universes are alive and healthy. And I really didn't think about that during the film, after the film, until maybe like last night. I was kind of thinking about it a little bit more, and I was like, I think that's what they were going for, and why we didn't see any of them. Because I was shocked that we didn't see any more Fox characters show up that have been in successful movies, but I think that's just it. We only saw characters that have been in movies that weren't received well, or their characters weren't received well, like Toad. Toad, what happens to a frog when it gets struck by lightning? The same thing as everything else. One of the worst lines in an X-Men film by Halle Berry, Storm. Toad was like done pretty dirty in that movie, so he's in the film. So I think they were trying to give love to all the rejects of the Fox universe,
which is cool. And I didn't think about that. That would be a really cool way if they did want to go about saying that, those other timelines and other characters, they're healthy, they're good, they're gonna be back at some point, but in the future. I kind of like that idea. That's a really cool take on it. But I was also surprised, we did touch on, we saw Human Torch, and he even does make mention of, Deadpool and Wolverine ask him, what is the void? Where are we? And he mentions that Reed knows what it is. Yeah. He has experienced it. I was surprised that we didn't see any of the other Fantastic Four members in some form or fashion, if they're going to give us one of them.
Yeah, that was also surprising. But maybe they just didn't want to do it. I know there's a big potential that they just didn't feel. I think I saw something that Jessica Alba was really good to play Sue Storm anytime that they called her. I think I saw that in an interview or a tweet or something. But, I don't know. I'm blanking on who plays Reed Richards. But I don't know if Reed Richards, Ben Grimm were available, wanted to do it, if they had the cap space for it. And like we said, the movie felt semi-rushed. I don't even necessarily feel like the movie was rushed. I feel like the story line was rushed, which we really haven't even talked about the third act of the film, or the villain, Sandra Nova. I didn't love Nova as the villain. it is Professor X twin that died in the womb in some universes, lived in others, and got put to the void. She has telepathic powers, kinetic.
Yeah, kind of like very similar to Professor X.
Very similar to Professor X, just a little bit more dependent on, I guess, distance. It's very. She loves to get people's brains in her hands, and that was very weird visuals and a lot of good jokes there from Deadpool was said that I didn't personally. Those didn't land as well for me. I just don't think they're going to land for me as well as some of the others. But I do think that the humor in it was pretty good. Especially, you know what humor you're getting if you go to a Deadpool film. This is more of the same. This is more of Deadpool 1, Deadpool 2. But I think those stories were better. The origin of Deadpool was awesome. Cable trying to save his universe was very good. And everything that was in that movie was very well thought out. But this one, Deadpool trying to save his universe, and then Sandra Nova escaping the void and trying to destroy all universes was very rushed. That moment, because she brings a legion of Deadpool, Wolverine, and Deadpool fight the legion of Deadpools. They kill them all, and then they regenerate. We get to see a character come in and be like, hey, he's good. And they're all like, we love this dude.
Peter.
Peter Deadpool. And so, like, he kind of, like, saves them, and then they just kind of run off, and, like, the fight's over. And I thought that was a weird play. I didn't love that fight anyway. I thought, like, they didn't do a great job of filming it. I didn't love the close-up running, because I felt like I needed to see more to understand the fight. Like, I kept finding myself watching only one or the other, and I couldn't really watch both people fighting at the same time. And it seemed like they were too zoomed in. They really should have gave us more. It felt very shallow. Then going through the bus, it was more of that. That was one of the times where I thought the violence was stupid. We get to see every window on the bus covered in blood, and it was just too much. I didn't like that. It didn't seem like it added to the fight, and it didn't seem like that was actually even relatively realistic at all. Why that would happen? It was just like they were turning windows red one after the other, and I didn't like that. And then Sandra Nova just kind of like gets defeated while Deadpool and Wolverine hold hands underneath the cellar. And we get to see the most ripped, jacked 50-year-old of all time in Hugh Jackman, who looks amazing. Guard your wives if they're going to come to this. You'll be in danger.
Unless you look just as good.
I don't know, dude.
You better be Henry Cavill if you're going to this movie and bringing your wife or something. But no, I agree with a lot of those sentiments. One thing you touched on a character I didn't even really think about was we didn't see Cable. I think that was, honestly, I believe he was supposed to be a confirmed character. Josh Brolin was, at least.
Really?
That was going to be in the movie. And it just, when you brought that up, I was like, we didn't even see him. So that was a little weird. And I was also going to make the joke, because I mentioned Zane mentioned we hadn't talked about the villain. Well, really, there was no need to talk about the villain, because it is one of those points of the movie that really bothered me as well, is they didn't give us a reason to not like Cassandra Nova, and they didn't give us a reason to make us feel like she really was a villain. I mean, at the end of the movie, they make her sound like, oh, she's just trying to destroy all universes, and she just wants to bring everything to the void, which in the void, she is like the ruler of the void. She kind of dictates what happens there and everything. But really, they don't give us any context as to why we shouldn't like her or why she is the way that she is. It really is, that's one of the moments I felt was probably the most rushed in the entire movie, was we didn't really have a villain. And I think they did that on purpose to give Deadpool and Wolverine their opportunities to fight and go back and forth and learn how to be a team. And then they're like, well, they've learned how to be a team, so we have to have them something to team up against. That's how that felt. It felt like it was just, let's just throw Cassandra Nova in there as their enemy so that they do have something to show off their teamwork against now. So I felt like the villain was a little bit lacking. You know, we've talked about some other movies like The High Evolutionary and Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Probably one of the best villains we've ever gotten in MCU. Oh, yeah. Super good, super fun. You hated him.
That's the difference. Is it's so funny because, you know, I really hated the High Evolutionary at the end of that film. And I think that's like the great contrast with some of the villains they've done in the MCU so far, because after Endgame, we have had some incredible villains. Mm-hmm. We've had the No Way Home villains return. We've had Namor, and then we've had the High Evolutionary. We've had stellar villains. But we have not had great consistency in our villains, and I think they've shown really good ways to do that. I think the Marvels with whatever forgettable name she is in it. You know, she could have been a good villain, but she didn't really have a path forward. And so we've seen the balance of really good, compassionate villains with Namor. We've seen villains we hate with High Evolutionary, and so many ways we can do it. And then we come to this one with Nova, and she's just like, we don't know why she's so evil. We don't know, like, her plan is not developed from the start. Her plan is developed from actions that Deadpool and Wolverine took. And so I think once your heroes create the villains' reasons and motives with what, like 33 minutes left in the film or something, I feel like that's always going to struggle to land the villain. And the point of this movie was not for the villain to be on display. They wanted to show Deadpool and Wolverine, but I think they to really display those characters, you have to give them something to fight against other than each other's. And we talked about the two fights that are amazing and incredible, but I wasn't super thrilled with those fights just because they're awesome, they're cool to see, but I was just as thrilled with the intro fight with Deadpool just fighting the TVA agents. I thought that fight was incredible and very fun, a great opener, but I mean, I would have rather had a good villain than two fights between Deadpool and Wolverine.
Yeah, I would have too. And that just goes to saying, like he said, when the villain really only had a reason to be a villain with 30 minutes left in the film, and it wasn't something that they'd been planning, it was literally just reacting to what circumstances they had been given. That was kind of a little bit rushed for me. So that was one of the things where the movie fell short. And I feel like with a really good villain, maybe someone kind of plotting against Deadpool and Wolverine, which they kind of try to do with the TVA agent that's going rogue, Mr. Paradox, but you kind of just know he's a nothing. You know, you don't really feel anything from him. And Cassandra Nova, you knew there was some power there. You knew she had the ability to be a villain, but they don't give you a reason as to why she is. So I feel like that was one of the issues I had with it was, that's why the villain was kind of forgettable. And one of the reasons we haven't really talked about it is because it's not something you really need to know, or really that even feels like it needs to be discussed.
Yeah, and I actually expected Mr. Paradox to die within the first 10 minutes of his screen. I just expected Deadpool to
shoot him,
behead him.
Behead him with a sword or something. Yeah,
because he had the adamantium
blades,
katanas, which I thought was really cool. And actually, because I was also thinking, like, how is Deadpool going to even last for any time against Wolverine? And one of the reasons is because he has adamantium katanas, which I thought was a really good call for them to say, for them to give him, so that he can actually not just get his steel blades shredded by Wolverine's claws.
Yes, no, that was a cool touch, and they did a really good job. I think the one thing we haven't touched on is the character design.
Ooh, so good.
Deadpool was pretty generic for the most part. He looks very similar to how he's looked in the past, but those few little touches that they gave him were really cool. By the end of the movie, he has his gold-plated Desert Eagles, which that's a funny running line throughout the whole movie, which I really liked. But the Wolverine character design was fantastic.
Until we get to the cowl, which I personally didn't love how he equipped the cowl. I thought it seemed, I'm probably saying that weird, but I liked how it looked at times. I thought at times it was not great. It is a comic accuracy that they are really going for, and they nailed it as good as it could be landed in live action, I believe. Mm-hmm. I just wish that they would have given a little bit better equipping of that prop, Jacob touched on the prop fairy coming and just giving it to him behind his back, and I wish they would have had a little bit better forethought, because we only see that in the last fight. We do not see that anytime up until that point, so I would have liked to seen it before then.
Yeah, and like you touched on, the way it's equipped is kind of just random. You don't see that he has a cowl for the entire movie, and then he just kind of pulls it out from behind his back, and you're like I said, the prop fairy must have been right there floating to hand it to him, because you're like, well, where has that been? And then he does his reasoning for why he doesn't wear it is he saves it for serious moments like killing, which I think that's right up Wolverine's lane. That made sense. But just the fact of how they did it, I can give or take it. It was cool to see it on. I think that was more so the factors we're getting to see Wolverine with the cowl on. That was the cool part about it. Whether how it looked and all that stuff, some people probably loved it. Some people probably didn't like it too much, because some of it was CGI'd, So you're not going to always get a really good look at it. But I think just the coolness factor was definitely there when he does equip it.
Yeah, me and you were talking about that after the movie, how it looked, and your wife Danielle even said that she didn't realize it was CGI, which I think is a really good point. You know, like me and Jacob are really looking intently at the entire movie, critically, visually. Like we're looking at the storylines critically, we're looking at the fight scenes critically, and especially the visuals, because that's really what's been the biggest complaint for a lot of people recently in Marvel is that the visuals aren't looking great. Which I don't have that complaint, but it was cool to see somebody who wasn't really paying close attention to that at all be like, I didn't even realize, which I thought was really, really good point that she made.
Yeah, no, that's definitely probably what Marvel's more so going for. You know, they're not going for us super nerds to be able to tell, like, oh, that was CGI. They're really kind of, you know, they're going to make more money off the basic fan base because there's more people there than there are us. So, no, I think they overall did a good job with it. It was cool to see. But overall, you know, that's a lot of the story that we've touched on. You know, we're getting towards the end. You know, like Zane said, they do hold hands. You know, the power of friendship is kind of how they defeated Cassandra Nova, which I think is really in line with the story. You know, these two characters that, you know, they have a lot of differences, but they do have a lot of similarities. And I think you kind of see that throughout the movie, which was a good underlying story point. It was fun to watch. I think this might be one of the most fun movies we've probably ever gotten from Marvel. You know, story points aside and all of that. I think just visually pleasing and fun to watch, this is very high in that regard.
Yeah, it was a blast, and I just texted with one of my friends about it, and I said, you know, I was grinning ear to ear pretty much the entire movie. Like, I did enjoy the whole film. It's just there's not much substance.
Yeah.
There's not so much substance to the film, and you were talking about the holding hands, the power of friendship at the end. It's just this exact scene has already been played out in a Marvel movie before, significantly better, significantly more emotional. And with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, it's just better. They do it better. There's better explanation. There's better setup to that point. And Deadpool just doesn't nail the landing. Now, I mean, visually, Wolverine looks better. I can't get over those abs, dude. But, you know, it just isn't as good. It's been done before. That moment could have been something else. Like they could have finished the film off with a better landing. They could have had a better story for it, but it's still fun. Do you want to go ahead and like kind of give your rating for it? Have you thought about it? Because I've actually changed my rating since the last time we talked.
So the ratings for me are really hard, and this is a movie that like it is just missing something. You know, it is missing the real good villain. It is missing a really good story. And if I'm basing everything off of, if we're talking action, if we're talking acting, if we're talking character design and, you know, visuals, this movie is almost as good as it gets on that standpoint. But when you're missing stuff like a story and you're missing the villains, those are really big points, right? Those are some of the biggest points for some people is you need those things to make a movie good. If we gave out half points on here, I think a 7.5 would be really fitting. You know, because it is missing so much of that substance. It is missing a good story. It's missing a lot of things, but the action and the character design and the acting really do lift up the movie overall. So for that respect, I am going to go ahead and give it an 8, just because I think it does. I'm a big fan of action, which, you know, one thing we haven't talked about, I haven't got to give my review of The Acolyte, which that'll be coming down the road in a little bit. That's something for me that really helped the show. The action was super good. I liked the visuals. I thought those things were really good in that show. And that's something that this movie definitely helps for me as well. I think the acting and the action was so good. All that stuff was so fun. Zane mentioned smiling ear to ear. I was the same way for the entirety of the movie. So I can't justify giving it a 7 because I had such a good time with it. But I'm going to be honest, if this wasn't a Deadpool and Wolverine movie, if this was another character and it had the same kind of storyline, I probably would give it a 7. I think the fact that it was Deadpool and Wolverine also helps it. If this was, you know, I don't even know of a character, but someone that we love, but we haven't really got to see for a while, and it had the same kind of story, I think it would hurt it because there wasn't much there. But overall, I think I'm going to go ahead and give it an 8 just because I enjoyed so many other aspects of it.
And I think an 8 is completely fair rating. I'm almost along the exact same lines, and I was thinking of it, but I'm going to have to give it a 7 for me. And the reason is everything you said. The story knocks off. I think the action was close to perfect. I do have some issues with the gore. I think it could have been better. I think Kingsman the Secret Service does a significant better job with this type of action. I think that's kind of the gold standard for over the top violence, in my view. And then the story was very lacking, and we had significant language and significant Christ jokes, which I'm not okay with. So that automatically knocks it down a point for me. So this probably is an 8, but because of those things, it would knock it down to a 7. Maybe even potentially a 6, but I love Hugh Jackman as Wolverine so much. Ryan Reynolds does such a good embodiment of Deadpool, and it is a Deadpool film. It's not like I went to a Iron Man film and they had a bunch of language in it and they were, very sacrilegious and everything else. Like, I knew what I was walking into. Yeah. Like, so I'm only going to deduct it 1 point because it is Deadpool, and it's not like it wasn't like it was expected. Yeah. Like, that is what it is. I willingly watched this. I went to the theater to watch this. Yeah. So I'm going to give it a 7. I think that's worthy, especially with how lacking the story was. Mm-hmm. The impact to the MCU was incredibly lacking, and I do wish that they had more tie-in with that, and maybe they will. Maybe we missed the tie-in that they were really going for. But when you pay as close attention to details as me and Jacob do when watching movies, and you don't see it, that means they either didn't mean it to show it or they didn't tell it appropriately. Mm-hmm. A lot of the times, you can be like, oh, I just missed that, and it was a little detail or something. But a lot of times, things like that, if you're going for the overarching story, you really need to make that very evident. I think back to stage 1 Marvel movies where they were complete standalone, even Thor the Dark World, right? Thor the Dark Lord was, built off of the first one. There was some tie-ins to the Avengers, but very little. But the entire movie was about the Ether, which is the reality stone of the Infinity Stones. So it had, like, even if there was nothing else tying into it, we got to learn about an overarching principle that was leading to Infinity War because the reality stone was there. And we just are missing those elements tying this in together. And we don't have to have tie-in, reference, but there should be something in the plot that is leading us to an overall story, especially if the story isn't good in of itself. Loki, I think, is a great example. We haven't seen any ramifications from Loki, essentially, except for this is the first time we've seen anything from Loki, and we both said that we don't think they did a great job with it. So if they had one of those elements that would have tied it together better, maybe I could up this even, to an 8, but with the language, jokes, and then the lack of storytelling, I think I just have to drop it to a 7, which I think is a fair rating. Yeah. It's got a massively high rating on IMDb. I think it's like an 8.6 or something, 8.3. So everyone is enjoying this film, and it's a very enjoyable time at the cinemas. But it's just not a great movie. I walk away from Dune Part 2 with the most masterclass of storytelling, the masterclass of cinematography. Action. This one doesn't have the masterclass of cinematography that Dune does. I think visually it looks pretty good. I think the CGI is good, but the cinematography is lacking. It seems like it was done on a stage. It seems like it was done in a studio, and that's okay. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just you're not going to get the visceral scenes, and I'm going to hold everything this year to Dune Part 2, and probably for a long time, because I think that's a perfect movie. It's a 10 out of 10 for me, and this just isn't close to that. I know a lot of people may enjoy it more than Dune Part 2 because Dune Part 2 is complicated. There's a lot of underlying story scripts, and it's not necessarily as turn your brain off movie as most things are. And not everyone likes to think through a movie, but that's the gold standard for me right now.
Yeah, I think seeing people say this is the movie of the year is just, it's not. Dune 2 came out this year, and I feel like people are already forgetting. If this were to somehow win an award over Dune 2, I would be so disappointed because it's not even in that upper echelon of movies. I don't even know it's in the upper echelon of Marvel movies, just based off the story not quite being there. I do think, action stuff, it's right there. it is up there with the best in Marvel when it comes to how good the action is, how good the character design is. The acting is second to none in Marvel, in my opinion. But just the story is just not there. And I think that took a whole point off of it for me, was just the story. And that's really the biggest part of a movie, right? You got to tell a good story. And this movie doesn't necessarily do that, but they do wow you with a lot of other things. So it was fun. It's definitely worth going to the movies to see if you're a Marvel fan and you like those type of things. But it's not one that I'm going to be like, you have got to go see this movie, because a lot of people were excited for this movie for the cameos, for those other characters, and even that's kind of lacking in a sense. They do bring back some really cool ones, but it's not like everyone was acting like it was gonna be. I think No Way Home did much better with bringing back old characters and really giving them a storyline, whereas this one, they're just kind of there for a few minutes, they do a little bit, and then they're gone. So all those things aside, I think it's not a rush to the movies to see, but it's one to go see if you want to have a good time.
Yeah, and I agree. And I do like that when I was thinking back through it, it kind of made more sense why the cameos they picked. It does make me feel a little better with it, even if that's just me thinking out loud and not actually what they were thinking. Even if I can inject my own thoughts into that, I think that's pretty good. But this definitely for me, you were talking about, I don't know, it's not upper echelon of Marvel movies. I think it's like right on the verge of maybe breaking the top 20 for me. And that's the top 20 MCU films. Like, I think it's right along the level of Captain America, the First Avenger, Iron Man 2, Ant-Man for me, kind of around that one. But I would have to probably watch it again to really get a see, because I've seen those movies so many times and they're so enjoyable and they're rewatchable. I can't watch this one at my house. Like, because first off, my wife is not okay with the language at all. She would not enjoy it on the screen, wouldn't enjoy me watching it. So, this is the first Marvel movie I've gone without her to the theater, which lowered my experience for it because she wasn't there. So just that fact alone automatically makes me like it less.
Well, and this is also, I do want to watch the movie again. I don't want it to sound like I'm just hating on it and I'm not going to watch it again. I do want to watch it again. Mm-hmm. But like Zane just said, this isn't really a movie I want to have on in my living room. I know that kind of sounds funny, but it's just really not. Like, I don't want to have people over and there's just F this and F that and all that going on in the background, right? It's not a movie like Avengers Infinity War. I can't tell you how many times I've thrown that movie on just in the background when people are over, just for background noise. And then you end up finding a scene that everyone gets locked into. This isn't that. So I do want to watch it again. I think it has a lot of good stuff there. But I think where Zane put it, maybe top 15, maybe. And that's pushing it. But I think top 20 is more so where this type of movie settles, because it's not better than a lot of... Zane has a list up right now that we're looking at, and it's definitely not top 10. And when I say top 15, that's even pushing it a little bit. So I think right there in that top 20 spot is probably right about where this movie sits for MCU. I do know some people are probably going to rate it higher just off nostalgia. Because it is a big nostalgia movie just purely off Hugh Jackman being there. But other than that, I think top 20 is a good spot for it.
Yeah, and if you guys would like to hear our full Marvel list, I can make Jacob put one together. What we're looking at right now is my current MCU rankings. I went through and ranked every single Marvel film. I put my ranking of every project together. So I do have all those rankings that if you guys want us to talk through, I can probably convince Jacob to do for maybe one upcoming film. But guys, that's our Deadpool Wolverine breakdown. We covered extent a lot of it, but there's still so much more to it. We didn't really touch on like Handsome Deadpool or Dogpool, which I think Dogpool was actually way better than I expected. Very funny, very good addition. I thought Dogpool was going to be stupid and dumb to include, but he was actually a highlight of the film. I loved him in it.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that because my sister and her fiance actually went and watched it yesterday as well. And my sister, who's not a diehard MCU fan, she's probably right along the lines of probably my wife. Like, she watches the movies. She goes and sees just about all of them, but she doesn't really care how it affects the story and stuff like that. She said Dogpool was her favorite part of the movie. So I think that is kind of going to be a lot of people's sentiments if you're just going with your significant other that really does love Marvel. And you will probably get a lot of solace in enjoying the Dogpool moments. I mean, I know she said she cried laughing, like literal tears at the end of the movie when he throws the shawarma burrito down, because he's so happy to see the Dogpool show back up in the movie, because he thought Dogpool had died. So, that's all the funny stuff there. But no, Dogpool was touched on very well.
Yeah, so, but guys, thanks so much for listening. And like I said, we're probably going to drop that SDCC news because that's hot off the press. A bunch of crazy things that we didn't touch on that I'm like holding my tongue to talk about because
Yep.
man, it's crazy. So we're very excited to talk about that. So we're probably going to be releasing that this week as well. But we wanted to make sure that we got this review out because we wanted to talk about it so bad because MCU is my lifeblood. It's my favorite franchise. These are the things that made me want to start a podcast. So I really wanted to get this one out, and then SDCC has a ton of stuff coming out that we're excited to talk about as well, and the future of some of our favorite franchise hold. But guys, thanks for sticking with us. We're gonna wrap it up right there. If you would like to leave us a review, subscribe, that would be amazing. We appreciate all the love and the views we've been getting lately has been encouraging. So guys, keep listening, keep giving us ratings. Send us suggestions. Like I said before, we do have a Discord. We've been doing a little bit work on that. So if you want to kind of see what our past ratings were that we put out in podcasts, you can kind of find them there. And then if you want to drop suggestions, get involved in the communication, that's a great place to get in there. I'll be in there. You can always talk to me and Jacob through that forum. Then we also have our X and we have our Instagram. So guys, thanks so much, and we hope that we will catch you in the next one. This is the Weekly Fix, signing off.